Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1 of Raising Dion. Do note, I am going to jump straight into spoilers, so if you have not seen all of Season 1 of Raising Dion, do not listen to this because I will spoil it for you. You have been warned. But kind of jumping into it in general, how I felt about the season, I thought was great. I wasn't expecting to kind of get surprised the way I was in many different regards. I mean, in general, like it's so interesting because it's like, like I said, we'll kind of break it down, but it's like for the first episodes, it's just kind of like, it's like very heartwarming. It's almost like this element of like there's so many interesting elements that even as an adult you can pull away from the show of like, the struggle of fitting in and stuff like that, and you can understand that, and just like there's this heartwarming aspect of the struggles of a mom trying to take care of her son, just kind of sadly having to handle things on her own, but then like obviously everything gets exponentially harder when you find out, your son has superpowers, so that adds an element to it. But I won't lie to you, things took a hard turn in like episode 8 going on. I was like, wait, what? Like I didn't expect a huge twist like that. But like I said, we'll get to it soon enough. But I did like the way like all the different relationships were built up. Obviously the biggest focus being, Nicole and Dion, like her struggling. I kind of was like pissed at her boss. God, what was his name? I'm blanking. What was it? Kuwait or something like that. Like I was, because her boss, he was very snippy. He wasn't willing to give her chances. It's like she literally lost her job just because I guess she kept showing up late. It's like she's literally a single mother, regardless of all that. But also just like her boss, because it's messed up. Because it's like, you're working at like essentially a dance studio, but you're kind of like, the ticket sales and stuff like that. You're not dancing because there's no position for a teacher and stuff like that, regardless, like, because I'm going tangent stuff like it. But it's just the way her boss kind of treated her. I was like, because that was a friend, that was a colleague and everything, but at the same time, I'm like, it's all shitty the way you kind of treat her, but, balancing that, obviously her relationship with her sister, that ended up being an interesting dynamic, especially later on when she kind of ends up finding out the truth about Dion, because literally the entire time, sis, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy. Oh wait, Dion's floating. Oh crap, this is all real. So it's interesting how it all kind of, ended up coming together like that. It just seems, and the way her cat kept talking, it almost seemed like Nicole acting the way she is. It seemed reminiscent of their mom. Like I guess like their mom doesn't, because we never really got too much insight into neither Mark's side of the family or, Kat and Nicole's parents. Like the reference, like we find out like, Mark's parents are in Germany, and like for Dion's birthday, her mom's back was hurt or something like that, and her dad wasn't going to leave without her, so that's why they didn't show. So it was just interesting back stuff like that. But like just the conversations with Kat made it seem like like something else was going on with the whole Nicole situation. Regardless. And then also there's the whole Pat situation I thought was kind of interesting, because I thought like, because Pat, it's like, he's looking after, because it's like, hey, Dion's my godson. The fact of the matter is Mark was my best friend, so obviously I'm going to look after you. You can definitely tell there were elements where you're like, he seems like he's got a thing for Nicole. And it's like, he kind of went so long without anything happening. I was like, maybe just nothing ever will happen. But I was still kind of like, because in the back of my mind, like I'm going to be jumping around, but I was thinking like, when it's all said and done, Mark's going to come back, and it's going to be an awkward situation of you making out with his wife, and that was your best friend who was kind of like a brother to you and everything. It was just an interesting dynamic, and especially because obviously prior to this I saw Jason Ritter in Kevin Probably Saves the World. That's the most recent thing I know because I'm not well versed in all of his filmography, but that's the most recent thing I'd seen him in. So seeing him kind of be this character was kind of similar in that vein, and then we took a hard turn in episode 8. I think that was episode 8. I was like, wait, what? Excuse me? Like I said, I'll get to it soon enough, but I just thought that was such an interesting element to it, because I really do apologize because I'm all over the place, but there's just so many interesting things. Like, for example, I like the fact is I still feel like we still walked away from the season not knowing fully what Dion is capable of. And it's so interesting to see how the powers kind of like work with other people, because there's similarities in powers, but at the same time, differences. Like, for example, Mark could turn invisible, but we also see that he can teleport, whereas Charlotte, she could use electricity, but, she could zap, but she could also turn invisible. Dion has a combination of all those abilities. He can turn invisible, he can teleport, he can also he has telekinesis, and he can also zap stuff too, but on a different scale than Charlotte. So that's why I'm thinking it's so interesting. And we saw another person from the Aurora had like fire ability, so it's just interesting. And another character had earth ability, so it seems like in some cases they might have like, we don't know the full scale of like, maybe some only have water ability, but why do certain people like Dion, Charlotte, and Mark, for example, have multiple abilities, where it seems like other people that kind of get introduced, like Brayden's dad, like I said, with the earth ability, and even Brayden himself being telekinetic, like why that seemed not telekinetic, telepathic is the word I was looking for. Sorry. You get what I mean? And so it's just interesting. Like, other people only seem like they had one ability, and it seems like Dion is like the extreme example. I mean, granted, we haven't seen the full scope of everything and everyone, so we don't really, know. But because I was immediately asking questions on, okay, so are we going to find out how Dion got his powers? Is it just going to be like, oh, he random got? But it's like, no, we find out it's connected to like some like Aurora event that like Mark as well as a whole bunch of other people saw, and that day they all got infected. And I thought it was interesting the way the story kind of set it up to be like, oh, like, Pat didn't get any abilities. He's like, because I waited on the inside, like, I don't have powers. Literally everyone else walked away from this having powers, but I didn't. And I was like, you actually kind of feel bad for him, because one decision to stay inside basically lost you the opportunity to have superpowers, Because I even like the way they went about, because I was wondering like how long it was going to be before Pat found out, but Pat found out like near the end of episode 2 about Dion's abilities and everything like that. So I just thought that was kind of, interesting. I even love like him being MM. I even love later on because Charlotte's like, why is your shirt said and it's like, it's MM for mind mover. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But getting to the point I was making, like I said, I like the way the story kind of slowly unveiled like everything, because it's like at first you're like, oh, Dion has powers, then you find out about Charlotte and stuff like that. At first it's like, wait, who's this woman Charlotte? Wait, this is the woman Mark say. But even Nicole's like, so that means he knew her beforehand because he had her phone number. But it's like everything said it was a stranger, so like what's going on here? So I was like, okay, I thought like maybe like this is kind of almost like a Stranger Things, because obviously the show has a very like Stranger Things feel and vibe to it. But the fact is, I was thinking like, okay, so we're dealing with something like this is part of like some science experiment. I thought Charlotte was kind of like the head of all of that and stuff like that. So I know the actress, I need to learn that actress's name who plays Charlotte. I see her in so many different things. But the fact of the matter is, when it was all said and done, and like when she first appears, I was like, what's going on? And then she reveals herself to have abilities. I was like, wait. And so showing that there are, it's not just Dion, there's a lot of people in this world that have abilities. And once again, we kind of tie this back to everything, the Arctic event in Iceland. And the sad thing is Nicole never knew because Mark never said anything. And it's like, and I think it's just because of, it's kind of a sad aspect that like Mark kind of had that thing where he kind of felt like, oh, I have to handle everything on my own. But more so than anything, in his own mind, it's like, I am protecting you. Like the fact is, he didn't want to drag, because like they already had so much they were dealing with, and he didn't want to take his drama and kind of bring it on top of them and everything. So it is interesting. I should also note, because obviously we're talking about Michael B. Jordan, which in another comic book property, so that's pretty cool. Obviously Killmonger and Black Panther, and now this. But regardless, the fact of the matter is, it's that, thing of like he kept secrets from them, and later on it kind of screwed them over, because even Nicole was like, because he didn't tell me, I wasn't prepared for this. Because I was even surprised when it was like, oh, Mark has powers. It's like, that makes sense why Dion has powers, because it's hereditary, which is interesting to know that this is, whatever happened to them is hereditary. And we do see elements like Brayden and Dion being second generation. We don't know how many other second generationers there are out there, but still, that was kind of an interesting development with the whole story in that regard. But obviously it's like I said, Nicole wasn't prepared, because not only did Mark lie about all this, because if he had told her, she'd be more prepared for what's happening to Dion, because now she has to be one that had to handle it on her own. Because for one, it's scary, because it's like something that's like, it can be pretty and beautiful, but at the same time, Dion's a kid. He doesn't know how to fully control it and everything, and so it looks scary and it can get out of control. But I did like, because obviously Pat kind of suggested, because he's the kind of superhero and comic book expert, that Dion get like a device or something to kind of like channel his power, which immediately when I think of that, I immediately think of Kuwabara from Yu Yu Hakusho, where he used to use that piece of a stick to kind of channel his power through. Also kind of reminds me, because in a similar case, it's Johnny from Shadow Hearts 3 from a New World, from the New World, whatever the case may be. It kind of reminded me of that, but it was kind of a neat element of like, oh yeah, what the watch represented, it being his dad, but also it gave him something to kind of focus his powers through, and it worked, But what I also thought was neat, because it wasn't just like Nicole's relationships that were kind of an interesting develop in this show. It is obviously Dion's relationship with everyone, ranging from like the mentorship relationship that he had with Pat, to the Esperanza situation. I love that, like, it's like she immediately was she was kind of alone and didn't really have many friends, and then Dion, she kept, like, because even Dion was like, no, I don't want her to be my friend, because because of the whole moving situation, he ended up having to leave so many of his friends behind and everything, and he couldn't make new friends at school, like, no matter how he tried, because he was kind of an outsider. They're skaters, he didn't really fit in and whatnot. But then when the situation came down to it, I even love at one point when they're talking to Tessa, like, Tessa get introduced to Esperanza, and she's like, oh yeah, hi, I'm Dion's best friend. He just doesn't know yet. And I was like to me, that, like, I'm telling you, I am a sucker for friendship. I get gushy over that stuff. I get sappy. Like, that's why I'm the biggest Kingdom Hearts fan, because I'm all about that friendship is power type of stuff. I'm a sucker for that. So it's like Dion and Esperanza's friendship was such a neat element to it. And then also that whole situation with Jonathan. They'd actually never go over this in the show. I think Jonathan has issues with his dad. They kind of, like, the fact is that you had, like, Esperanza kind of brings it up a little bit about Jonathan's stuff, like, situation, but they don't really go too much into it. But I think, because for him, he ends up explaining, like, why he took Dion's watch and everything like that, why he was kind of being a jerk. It's because all Dion would do is go on and on about his dad and stuff, like, oh, how amazing his dad is. But I'm assuming it's because for him, because he says it later on, it's like, oh, my mom's boyfriend. So it's like, his mom and dad aren't together, so either it's like a situation of, like, his dad died or they divorced. I was under the assumption, like, his dad had died, or maybe it is a situation of just maybe his dad just wasn't in his life anymore. Either way, it's like he resented Dion because Dion just talked about, oh man, look how amazing and great my father is, so that's why he kind of disliked Dion. Besides the people it's a sad situation where he's kind of like a bully that got bullied. It's like, oh, I'm hanging with this group, but this group kind of puts me down, so I'm going to put someone else down to make me feel better type of situation. But I did like, it was kind of sad because at, Dion's birthday party, and it's like that episode was kind of sad because, like, at every step, everything went wrong for Nicole. The fact of the matter is she couldn't get off of work in time. It's all Thomas's fault. She got there too late. The lady wouldn't let her in to get the cake, but she's banging on the door and it's like, oh, sorry. Literally, as she's about to get in the car, you can tell someone's writing up a ticket. You can tell Nicole's like, no. She gets there in time, but Dion doesn't want the cake because he feels like, because his friends make fun of him because they're like, oh, like, you're into this stuff. Yeah, we used to be in it, but now we're older, we're cooler. And so now Dion feels even left out. Like the old friends he had left behind that he was still friends with, it turns out, oh, they're not his friends anymore because they don't like what he liked. Well, the only person that was by his side the entire time was Esperanza. But for him, it's like, oh, you can't keep your mouth shut. But it's like, oh, she has the entire time because she's known about your power. She's like, oh yeah, I saw what happened to Jonathan. You weren't near him and he got hurt. And, but what I also like, though, is, and I'm also a sucker for the bully becoming one of the good guys. Since I brought up Stranger Things, good old Steve Harrington. That was a beautiful 180 for his character. And you kind of had that with Jonathan, where, like, he actually kind of spends time with Esperanza and Dion, to the point Dion starts getting a little jealous because, like, no, Esperanza's my BFF, and everything. And I was like, oh, that's actually kind of adorable. But, so I thought it was interesting. But even then, like, I think Dion and him have bridged their gap. And it's like, because I think even Dion realizes, like, oh, like, he's not, because Esperanza's like, oh, they're not really his friends because of the way they treat him, so, but he's literally the same way as Dion. Dion just wanted to fit in. Jonathan wants to fit in. It's like, oh, these guys are kind of douches to him, so, but he still hangs with them because it's like, yeah, they're kind of his friends. Cause it's almost like this twisted thing of, like, once again, there's elements of, like, lessons you can still pull away from this, even as an adult, of being like, if people don't, like, treat you the way they would treat anyone else, don't be friends with them. Like, they're not worth spending that time and energy. Find people that really click with you. And obviously for Jonathan and Dion, they found each other, and Esperanza. So I just thought that was kind of a beautiful element to the whole situation. Hell, even, Nicole actually found a good friend outside of all this, the whole Tessa situation, so I thought that was kind of, neat, because there was the whole, like, oh, the whole Pat situation. It's like, oh yeah, because, and I'll get to it soon enough, but I just love that they immediately brought that up at Tess, being like, oh, like, Pat, he's always kind of pushing himself into your life and doing stuff you didn't want him to. Like, the fact is that you tell him not to do something, he does it anyway. I'm like, that's so interesting. I didn't even think about that till now. It's like that comes so full circle later on that you're like, they've been basically giving you the clear sign of this. I mean, they weren't clearly pointing it out, but there were trickle elements foreshadowing all this. Like I said, we'll get to it soon enough. But I do love Charlotte showing up and being Dion's trainer. I'm a mentor, like, you know, teaching him, and I love her like zapping him and every time because she's trying to teach him how to turn invisible and everything. And I thought it was so sweet in the grand scheme of things of like the bond that they ended up forging, because for her it's like, you know, your dad could teleport and everything, but Dion was like, yeah, but it saved him. It was like, yeah, because he stayed and saved me, so I'm gonna stay here and save you. And I was like, oh, like the fact that they actually bonded and stuff like that, because he kept talking about the fact that she was mean. She's like, you know, I can literally hear you. She kicked Nicole out being like, no, we need to train, and he's not gonna be able to go to his full potential if you're around kind of babying him. So you know, Charlotte kind of gave some tough love, because for her it was about teaching him how to survive, because it's like obviously the storm that, well, they later on refer to him as the Crooked Man. The Crooked Man is too powerful for you to go up against, which I thought that was a really nice introduction when they first introduced it. I was like, because I saw the trailer a while back, so I couldn't remember like if there was like a monster to this, but it turns out there was, and it's just this like giant like electrical man situation. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. It was even sad because we saw that moment that Mark ended up dying, you know, because he was protecting Charlotte, and you know it ended up grabbing him. But at a moment you could tell, like, I was like, oh, it's not actually straight up killing them, is it? It seemed like it was absorbing them. So I was like, maybe, because at one point Dion sees like a whole bunch of like ghosts and stuff like that, and his dad was amongst him, and Nicole saw that. I was wondering if it's supposed to be kind of almost like an after image of like they're still there inside the Crooked Man. All you have to do is kill the Crooked Man, and that kind of gets undone. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. Like I said, we'll get there eventually down the road. But I did love that with Charlotte. The fact is that, you know, her being invisible, watching over Dion and everything, I thought was even sweet, because even, you know, it's like, you know, Charlotte felt like she couldn't really do anything but run, because for her it's like she didn't really have anyone that would miss her, so the whole being on a run thing, leaving everything behind, it didn't really cost her too much. But obviously for someone like Nicole and Dion, it would cost them everything. It would cost them every aspect of their life if they went on a run. But it's like, you stay here, we're family. And I thought that was kind of sweet, because, you know, despite everything, like, because Charlotte didn't really have anyone, but that, like, you know, have and I even thought that was kind of interesting, because like when she met Braden was like, no, why can't I go with you? Who's Dion? He started getting a little possessive and stuff like that. It's like, no, you're lying to me. You want to spend time with Dion. It's like, why were you helping him? Why won't you help me? And I was like, that is interesting. I guess because it's a combination of, because the way Dion says it, like, because he asked her, it's like, oh, how's it feel to be a superhero? She's like, I'm not a hero. He's like, with powers, you're either a hero or a villain. And she's like, I don't know what I am. It's like, you could try being a hero, but for her, it's like she felt like she never really had it, you know. But I think it's sad when it's all said and done. But the fact is, you know, Charlotte doing what she did, like, she had her hero moment. She was doing what she could to protect Dion, especially after everything that happened. Because I think there's also the aspect of like, she felt indebted to Dion, because it's like, your dad sacrificed himself to save me. The least I can do is, you know, fight to protect you. But also I think she spent so much time with him that they ended up, you know, growing closer together. You know, I think it did kind of feel like she kind of had a little bit of a family for a little bit. You know, it's kind of sad that element kind of was so sadly short-lived for her in the grand scheme of things. Another element to this is the whole Biona situation. Especially I like how that kind of, because at first you're kind of thinking like, oh, this is just the company Mark worked for it and everything, and that Pat works for. I even love that moment of like Dion, them helping out that like Fox and healing and everything. Like, that's where I actually forgot about it too. It's like, right, he can heal to him. Like, dude, what else are you capable? Are you going to be like the Superman of this universe, where it's like you are like God level powerful or something like that? It's just kind of an interesting element to it. I also like what we end up getting. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about it. I like the reveal where it's like, oh, because Dion is a kid, he does have limitations. That basically, because he's a kid, there's only so far he can push his abilities without it straining him. I mean, granted, there's other aspects to it, but we've never seen him fully push his abilities like later on. But it wasn't until he started healing Pat that I was like, oh, that took it all out of him. I was like, what was that about? And it was like, oh, is it simply because before he had only healed like a small animal, now he was healing another human being? Well, because Pat never wanted to go to the doctor, so I was like, is it cancer or something? But also another part of my brain is because there are some instances in like fiction and stuff, I mean, obviously in fiction, where someone will heal someone with the ability, but they'll carry the illness with them, if I remember correctly. Because I think the dude in almost like you devoured the illness in certain cases. I'm pretty sure that there's a healer in Heroes. I think it kind of worked like that, not necessarily, but there are instances of like someone healing someone and they kind of take the disease on themselves. It's actually kind of interesting because obviously Roswell, New Mexico recently came back. It's in its second season right now. Obviously that's the thing where Max could heal people. Obviously it took a lot of them, so it was kind of a similar circumstance. But I thought just because maybe Pat was so super sick that it took its toll on Dion. Kind of seems like that is the case, but we'll circle back to that. That whole situation with him being sick, and obviously the reveal of Kat, even Kat having to implode her life because, well, she was basically getting fired from her job. Her girlfriend, ended up having to break up because she couldn't tell her girlfriend the truth about what was really going on. About why she was deleting Dion's medical files and stuff like that. Hell, because even Kat didn't believe her sister. She was I was about to lock you up for 72 hours psych ward type of situation. And she's like, Nicole's like, wait, what were you? She's like, I didn't do it. It's like, but it's like, no, you were thinking about it. That was the whole thing. But getting back to Bayona, I thought was kind of interesting. Because the fact is, Pat wanted to prove himself to Suzanne, his boss. Interesting enough, because I had to look it up because I was so curious. The actress who plays Suzanne, her name is Alion. And I kept being like, why do I recognize her? She's Dagon from Supernatural. I was like, hey, because I kept being like, I knew her from something. I just thought that was interesting. But nevertheless, because at first it was kind of like, especially when we find out what they're up to. The fact is they're spying on all of the people with abilities. Now, my immediate thought was, I was thinking that the Crooked Man was something of their creation. That was just kind of like, because I had it in my head and early on, I was like, the fact is, whoever this is, I thought the Crooked Man was one of them, that's a superpowered person killing other superpowered people because I don't want other people in the world to have abilities. I want to be the only one that's there. Or I thought maybe he was absorbing all their power to make himself stronger. Not necessarily absorbing their abilities and making it his own, not like an osmosis ability, but more so just like, I'm taking your power to make myself beefier. Bayona was behind that. Because obviously they seemed all secretive and stuff like that, especially when Dion got sick and it's like, we're using this as an opportunity to CDC go in, snatch him up. And I thought that was interesting because especially later on, because Suzanne was like, no, it's not like that. You're lucky we got there ahead of time. It's like, you were literally looking for the opportunity to snatch him up and you're trying to make, and especially the way Suzanne handled that, because she went out about it like a vicious businesswoman of like, no, we're going to keep Dion because we don't know if he's in danger to other people and stuff like that. So CDC can keep him for 72 hours or indefinitely if we can prove that he's a harm to others. But even I'm like, isn't anyone going to call out the fact is, should he really have been just taken like that without any issue? Because wouldn't protocol call for the entire hospital to be shut down? Because they would have to check out everyone that's been in contact with him. And I just thought, you would think that would kind of matter. So you would think the CDC would bring stuff to them, not necessarily separate, because that would put more people in danger bringing them outside. That never gets brought up, but that's just immediately where my mind is. I did like the fact is that Nicole went to Bayona and raged hell, and everyone's trying to trace her down. She picks something up off a desk and throws it and breaks the guy. She's like, "Do I have your attention now?" I'm like, "That's." I mean, obviously that's a mother, word because her baby was snatched from her, So, but just like Suzanne, at first I was like, I don't trust you. You definitely, because they had looked into Mark's files, he had the secret files, and he was wondering if Bayona was responsible for this, and that started making that kind of fed into my thought of they've got to be the ones behind the Crooked Man and everything, the Man in the Lightning. I just thought that was so interesting because you could definitely tell he was after superpowered people and stuff like that. But I wasn't sure what Bayona was getting out of this, but I guess it's just kind of they wanted to understand Dion, because it turns out, and it's something that Suzanne had explained to Pat at one point in time when she was suspicious of him, but didn't really have the evidence for, was the fact is that basically at the center of that Aurora event, there was one particular section that was kept safe, but the outskirts were kind of like it's almost like they're infected and dying and decaying. And now, Bayona, in particular, Suzanne, wants to stop that. Because I still kind of feel like you're probably trying to figure out this superpower thing so you can manufacture it and control it, especially when you have people who are able to do all that they can do. But later on, it kind of seems like maybe you weren't the bad guys. I don't know. Maybe... I don't know, but we never really got into the depths of what it was that Mark had found in his research and stuff like that, so... Because what I'm also curious about is, like, obviously the radiation affected different things and different people differently. Well, because the fact of the matter is, obviously Dion took, Pinchy, but the fact is he has abilities. Because you see it at one point, because obviously when him and Charlotte are invisible, they're trying to keep Pinchy hidden from George. Which George, why is he so anal about people not being down there? Like, I like that he pops up like 2 or 3 times in the entire show, and he's just there to be the begrudgingly just old guy that is the apartment manager and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, at one point Dion tried to put a cup on top of him, but he teleports. So it's like, so you have abilities, and we see kind of instance more later on. But obviously the foxes got sick, some of the other animals got exposed, but Pinchy seems to be the only one we're aware of, at least that they showed, that had abilities. So I thought that was interesting. So, and it seems like I guess it depends on, kind of like when we saw all that go down, it seemed like direct contact doesn't seem like it's the same, because that was radiation pouring down, but no one else got really full-blown direct contact like that. I think it came nearby, and it's kind of like you got nearby radiation, so it affected them differently. Maybe when it hit the ground, remember what it was. Whatever hit, like whatever is there that was spared from the radiation from the aurora, it wasn't affected. The land wasn't there. There was something buried there. And I think when the meteor shower or whatever, when it hit the ground, that mixture gave everyone their powers. So like I said, we'll kind of get to that later on. But I just thought that was interesting how that whole situation, so it kind of seems like maybe the animals got more direct radiation, so that's why they got sick. Maybe Pinchy was in the general area like everyone else was when they got powers, so maybe that's why Pinchy has the powers that he does. So I just thought that was kind of, an interesting element. Another element to this I want to really quickly talk about, I thought was kind of interesting, was like the whole thing of like when Jonathan and Dion got into that whole scuffle, like his science teacher was willing to give him a chance, but obviously the principal, I think he's a teacher, but I think didn't he go into the principal's office at one point in time? Regardless, he was thinking like, oh, Dion's a bad seed. It's like, this dude stole that's my dad's watch, but he didn't, he's like, oh, what happened? I was like, oh, but he didn't scold Jonathan at all. All he did was scold Dion. And the sad thing is Nicole has to basically teach her son later on, and like, oh, basically racism. I'm like, that's so interesting, because I consider myself very fortunate. I never had to, not that I'm aware, I've never really had to deal with racism. Like, I consider myself fortunate. I'm not trying to say like, oh, it doesn't exist. I'm not saying anything like that. I consider myself very fortunate. I've never had to deal with that in my life. The fact is, I don't remember my parents ever having to explain that to me. Like, oh, some select people in the world will treat you differently just because of the color of your skin, because of where you're from and stuff like that. And so it's interesting to me that Nicole basically has to explain that to Dion. I was like, that's such a crazy thing to have to explain to your kid. Like, I mean, that's the reality of the world. You have to prepare them that people will treat you differently just because you are different, I mean, you can also make the argument maybe Esperanza kind of felt a little bit of that too, just because of her situation. Like, it never came up too much, but it came up a little bit, just about like, but I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily the reason why she didn't really have any friends. I mean, I wonder, just because maybe, her kids, it's like, oh, it's something they don't understand. So they're like, oh, I don't understand, so I'm going to stay away type of thing. I don't know. That's just kind of potentially like how my brain kind of processes it. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting conversation to end up having. Because even Nicole was reluctant to have that conversation, but Kat was like, you need to have it with him. It's like, he's already gone through so much, going to a new school, not having any friends. Obviously he's got this power thing, but now it's like losing his dad, and now you want me to tell him that basically the world's going to keep beating him down, and Kat's like, yeah, you got to be, so he's prepared for it, because obviously, once again, Mark didn't prepare you or him for what was coming with his abilities and everything. So it is a thing where honesty is kind of the best policy in certain regards. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting element. I did like, though, that Charlotte did have his back, because he ended up tripping to do, like, wait, oh, he tried to treat you all right. And it's like, that's what I'm saying. Like, Charlotte starts off a little cold-hearted, but the moment she spent more time with Dion, she came to care for him and stuff like that. It's like, I thought that was really sweet in the grand scheme of things. But another element to this was the whole Pat and Nicole situation, like when they hung out and they kissed, I was like, oh, this is gonna get awkward. I was wondering where things were kind of going to go, because at first it was awkward, and it's kind of like, oh, like he's the godfather and everything, but when Dion was in the hospital, he really couldn't go, and I was like, okay. And Nicole's like, no, you kind of stay here, the room's down the hall. He's like, right. And it's like, he kind of feels like he kind of got left behind in the grand scheme of things. But I thought was interesting, though, it's like, she wanted to just kind of keep their friendship because he was like, oh, I can be whatever you need me to be. And then that happened. You felt like he was crushed and broken about it. Then he's asking all this questions. Because at first he's like, oh, I'm here to see Dan. I was like, oh, Nicole, yeah. And things are still awkward and everything. I was like, oh, maybe they can repair things. And then he finds out, like, wait, there's food. Did your mom have a friend over or something like that? It's like, oh, because it was Charlotte, but they're not supposed to tell him or anyone about Charlotte. But when the time comes, he finds her again, but he sees her in a dance studio with home dude. That's like, oh, and then there's that moment where he just kind of like, you're just using me and stuff like that. She's like, well, I'm sorry if I felt like you felt like I was leading you on, but I don't look at you that way. And for him, and just the way he started going off, I was like, okay. I thought he got caught up in the moment, and there was a part of me that was like, oh, I kind of feel bad. I won't lie to you. There was a part of me at that moment I was like, oh, I kind of feel bad for Pat. He just, it's like, I was like, oh, maybe he's not saying things the right way. Maybe he'll kind of fix things and apologize. But then he says a line of like, I'm practically Dion's dad. It's like, you're practically not. You're not his father. I mean, I get it. It's like, I get it to a certain extent, but I was like, you're kind of crossing the line. It's just kind of like, I was like, even I was kind of like, oh, you came off a little douchey. At that moment, I was like, don't tell me Dion, because that moment before we get further, I was thinking like, all right, so don't tell me Pat's going to start acting like a D-bag, and I was like, oh, you're going to work with Biana, like, because I thought like maybe like he was starting to get pissed, and he was like, oh, I'm not protecting her anymore, like it was his way to kind of get back. I thought that's the element we're going down. No, we got that serious ass twist of like, Charlotte, pick up Dion, don't let Pat nearby. And then it's like, because she's talking about the fact is Pat acted like she owed him or something, like he was owed being with her or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I kind of still felt a tiny bit bad for Pat, but at the same time, I was like, I understood where Nicole was coming at it from this situation. And he's like, I'm gonna go see Dion. It's like, Charlotte's like, no, you're not. And he's like, you're not gonna stand in my way. Like, I gotta see Dion. Oh, that's what she called me entitled, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, all right. And she zaps him, and he's like, I should have killed you in New Orleans. I was like, wait, what? Legitimately didn't see that twist coming. I didn't expect it to be Pat. Like, did a very good job. I mean, maybe other people pieced that together, but I didn't. But that's what I mean, where it kind of shows you. From the beginning, Nicole was like, don't do this. I tell you no. Because she made it clear later on to Dion. It's like, oh, like, he didn't respect my boundaries. When I told him not to do something, he did it anyway. Because he kind of felt like, oh, like, I should feel this way about him because he feels this way about me. Like, he was kind of entitled to it. And you kind of see that periodically throughout the season, like I said, little moments here and there, when you add it up, it's like, that actually makes perfect sense. Once again, like, yes, it was kind of that thing of like, oh, I'm going to help you out. But it was a thing of like, he had a hard time taking no for an answer. And then you think about that situation at the hospital. It's like, oh, I'm his godfather. You can wait outside. And he almost said like, I'm his godfather. I'm like a father to that kid. I should be let into that. Because I'm not like family. I am. Like, he didn't say that, but he had that look on his face. So it changes the whole way you perceived all the stuff prior to that. And I think that's such an interesting detail of just like how that was handled and everything like that. That reveal was so interesting because now we turn him into not like, oh, he was a caring, doting friend, to an obsessive stalker to an extent. Because like basically, because I was like, okay, and then because part of me was like, is that why he killed Mark? Did he kill Mark because he was jealous because he actually started having feelings for Nicole even back then? So he killed Mark to get her out of the way. But it's like, we end up finding out later on, he killed Mark by accident because Mark didn't tell him he was going to New Orleans. He was going to New Orleans to get Charlotte, but Mark got in the way. It's like, if he had just told me where he was, none of that would have happened. And he's even blaming Nicole, being like, oh, all this is your fault. I love Dion and I love you. We could have just been happy together. And it's like, now it adds a certain perspective, because at first when we saw those burns on his body, like those marks on his body, my mind immediately was like, oh, is that from like Charlotte hitting him with the lightning and everything? Which, dude, that sucks. Even with all that happening, Charlotte went down swinging, blasting him with lightning, but sadly he ended up killing her. But the fact is, I was like, that sucks. But the fact is that I was thinking, I thought that's what that was. It wasn't until later on when Nicole was like, oh my God, is that like with the fox? I was like, oh, right. I was like, that's what it is. It's radiation. Hence what I was talking about before. Because I think out of anyone, Pat was exposed to direct radiation. I think he was outside of the range of where everyone else in that area was protected by what was under the ground. So the radiation only gave them powers. It gave Pat not only powers, essentially it gave him cancer, which is interesting because it's like comic book thing. This is only something I've learned because of this whole Phase 4 stuff of the MCU. That's kind of like Lady Thor's story in the comic book. She, it's kind of a similar thing. Like, you gotta have this power, but it kind of basically undoes all her chemotherapy. It gets rid of all the radiation in her body, kind of undoing all her chemo. That's really messed up aspect to that character. Like I said, that's just something I picked up from people talking about the whole Lady Thor thing. But it's kind of interesting because it kind of applies in this case too. But it's also, that's why he's been going after because he needs their powers to stay alive. Because it seems like the first time he did it was an accident. It's that entitlement of he's with someone and he's like, I've done everything for you. I do this, I pay. I'm like, ooh. It's like, and that makes me wonder, did Pat become like that because of the powers? Like, is it a situation of it amplifies what's already there? So it's like Pat always been like this, it just made it stronger, or was it just a byproduct of getting those powers that he became like that? I don't know. It could be a toss-up between the two. I mean, granted, we know that over the years he never really had many relationships, but it makes you wonder, is that a byproduct of it and stuff like that? It's like, that's crazy to kind of think about it. But it's also like, that's why he's been hunting down all those people over those years, because he's been in so much pain. But also, that's what I was bringing up, like with the whole Dion healing him thing. It's because basically Dion's healing all the radiation in his body. And obviously, like, he has to kill superpowered people and absorb them as a means of recovering. So that's a temporary solution, and I guess like Dion would have presented a permanent solution, because we see earlier on, like, it alleviated the headache. Granted, it made Dion sick as hell, but like, he had uncovered and brought up to Suzanne, if Dion pushes his abilities too far, he'll die. He even talks about the fact that I didn't want Dion to heal me because I knew what it would do to him. He did it to me anyway, but now it's like, it's kind of all I have left. I need Dion to help me and to save me, to cure me. So it's like, it was such an interesting element. Like I said, I brought up before, I'm not well versed in all of Jason Ritter's, his filmography, but just because like the few things I've seen him in, he's always been a good guy. Once again, in my head, I'm thinking of Kevin Probably Saves the World. Granted, that was a complicated character, but he had a good nature to him. So to see him go from that to kind of being this stalkery, like, obsessive person, to being straight up the villain, I thought was kind of a nice direction, where it's like, oh, because literally the entire season, like, oh my God, nice guy Pat. Like, oh man, you kind of want things to work out between him and Nicole. And it's like, oh, never mind, because, oh, lo and behold, our dear boy Pat is a serial killer. He's been killing all these superpowered people. And I thought that, like I said, I love the execution of that. That was so beautifully done, especially when they picked the time to reveal it at the end of the season. It's like, boom, because I think after everything, like I said, we got a little slow escalation to it, because it's like, oh yeah, things are awkward between him and Nicole. And then it's just like that moment where he kind of blew up at her. It's like he went from, like, he was going about, let's say about 15, 20, and he went straight to 100 right there. You're like, Jesus, where the hell did that come from? What is also an interesting thing is, the fact is, we get that thing like, oh, like Dion couldn't really teleport for a while. I completely forgot until he started teleporting again. I was like, right, I forgot you couldn't teleport, because I forgot that was a whole conversation he had with Charlotte, where it's like, after that whole car accident situation in episode 2, he hasn't teleported since then. I didn't even realize it, because he's been doing so much other stuff. Hell, there's even that moment where he was the Alicia Keys song was playing outside, and he ended up making it kind of sparkle in that room, and they were dancing. And it's like, I should also know, they had a really nice selection of music. There's actually one song in particular I had to go find it. It's called, the artist's name is Ruth Ann, and the song's called The Vow. It was in that scene where Nicole is thinking about Mark's death and stuff like that. That scene, because she was in the bathtub drinking wine. I think she was drinking wine at the time. But she was in the bathtub thinking about it. That song played during it. I don't know what it is. I was like, oh, I like this song. I gotta look up what this song is. It's a very pretty song. I was just like, oh, I don't know. It spoke to me. And you're like, sometimes you hear music, you're just like, I don't know why. The vocals and just the song itself, the melody, it just all just kind of hits me. And I'm like, I gotta find out what this song is. And I found out what it is. So once again, if you're curious, it's Ruth Ann, The Vow. If you're just curious to hear like what song in particular I was talking about, there. Regardless, tangents and all that. But just, like I was just saying, like it had a very nice selection of music. But circling back to the whole situation with Pat, When we cut to Kat's place and it was banging on the door, I was like, oh, that's Pat. I was like, oh, this isn't good. He's like, oh, do you know where Nicole is? She's like, yeah, I don't know. I was like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, yeah. And she's like, I have no idea. Why are you acting so erratic and a little crazy, Pat? And then like she's like, yeah, I think you need to go. I'm going through so much right now. He's like, I'm worried about your sister. I think she'll hurt Dion. And he's like, she would never do anything to hurt Dion. And it's like, I don't think she's in the right frame of mind. I was like, I love how you're twisting this. And she's like, yeah, you got to go. And Pat closes the door. He's like, no, not before you tell me where your sister is. I was like, ooh, this got scary. Ooh, this got scary. But it's like, oh, who's that on the phone? Is that Nicole? It's like, no, it's not Nicole. I think you need to go and stuff like that. And it's like they went to our parents. I was like, is that really where they went? It's like, luckily it wasn't, because Nicole was on her way to Cass. It's like, yeah, Pat was over here acting weird and crazy, like what's going on? And explaining to her sister, yeah, the crooked man. It's like, what? Yeah, basically explaining that it's a supernatural storm, sis. Ain't no kind of fixing that. So we need to kind of get away, kind of hide, taking Charlotte's advice, because she had even said, Charlotte, like we'll stay as long as we can, but like when it's time to run, we'll run. And she proceeded to run. But Dion, he was still dealing with like, oh man, like he feel like he messed things up with Esperanza, the whole like lifting her up. Because I think for him, because I get where he was coming, because for him, he's talking about it later on, Jonathan and her were getting so close that he was worried that like, oh, maybe this is my friend. And it's interesting because Charlotte had told him, it's like, oh, did you ever ask her about all the stuff that like, did she ever want to walk again? Had she ever walked previously? Like how she ended up in the wheelchair? And then Dion realized like, oh, like they're friends, but he actually doesn't know anything about her. Like we don't know anything, because I would assume if Dion knew anything, we would know. And it's like, oh, you've been friends for how long? And you don't really know that much about it. And it's like, oh, for him, it's just like, he just kind of accepted as a thing that it is. I guess he just never felt the need to really ask her about it. It's like, oh, that's Esperanza. Esperanza's Esperanza. So he never looked at it as kind of like because he always looked at her at the beginning. It's like, oh, that's that annoying girl that wants to be friends. He didn't look at it as like, oh, this girl in the wheelchair. Like, I don't think he processed it. I think that's just kind of like his innocent mind. At least that's how I look at it. But it made him realize when his mom had that conversation about Pat, it made him realize like, oh, like I crossed that line for Esperanza, because it's like, oh, you're trying, because I think for Esperanza, I mean, once again, this is just me assuming. I don't know her mind, but for me, it's like, oh, it's like me being in his wheelchair is an issue. Is kind of what that makes it. Oh, you're trying to make me walk like I'm, and I think that's what ends up being a conversation later on, is that he made it seem like she was something broken that needed to be fixed. That's kind of my understanding of it. But like, Dion kind of apologizes to her and Jonathan, because he's like, yeah, I kind of bailed on both of you, but I'm here for the project and everything, because like Jonathan was like, wait, you're telling me I'm gonna have to talk? It's like, yeah. I even like the little device they came up with, the storm killer and everything. It was actually pretty dope. Jonathan's quite the little engineer, because Dion's the one that kind of like, he was the conceptor. He covered the science, and obviously Esperanza was, the artist and stuff like, well, that's what her and Jonathan kind of represented. They both represented the artist, so I thought it was kind of a neat thing. But nevertheless, Pat, that whole situation of him showing up at the cabin, and even her being like, wait, how did you get here? He's like, oh yeah, where's Dion? Oh yeah, like Dion had contacted me. And it's like, but she's like, I didn't see your car pull up. It's like, didn't you just see the storm outside? And it's just like, it all kind of ended up getting revealed to her the way it did, and he started like flexing his power, and she ends up hiding under bed, luckily, because the inside of that house exploded, but luckily she stayed alive. It's so interesting how we ended up getting their story kind of told the way it was. Like, it was like, we saw basically when they got married, and obviously Mark telling Pat, but then also like when he found out she was pregnant, to like Dion's birthday party, like, what was it, about 2014 or something like that, around that time. And now it's like, we, at the very end of it all, we get to see where it all started for them, how they actually met each other. And I thought that was kind of a neat element to the whole situation, because she was just out partying, and she was like, well, there's a 4-book limit, and you have, and she was trying to count them, and he's like, 6. She's like, 6 books out, and it's like kind of a stickler for the rules and stuff like that. So it was just interesting to kind of see their love story kind of told in a very interesting way like that. But Pat wanting Dion to save him was like, oh, buddy, I'm worse off than I thought I was. I'm dying. I was like, I need to ask my mom if I can help you. He said, no, come on, bro. You're my best. Oh, come on, Dion, help me, please. This is your real life hero moment. Luckily, Nicole shows up in time to save him. I wonder, did Dion actually think that was possible? Because he was like, oh, maybe we could get rid of the evil inside of Pat and he'll be good again. But obviously, he attacks Pat, but I'm wondering, was there a part of him that was wondering about that? I mean, to be fair, it's like, you hurt my mom, you try to hurt my mom, you're trying to hurt people I care about, and you killed my dad, you know. So, but Jonathan and Esperanza are there. Luckily, you know, eventually Bayona had showed up with Susan at the forefront and everything. So, but it was kind of a pretty epic where Dion and, you know, Pat go head to head. It kind of made me immediately think of like Bean clashing in DBZ. I can't tell you, like, once again, that's probably one of my favorite things in anime. Just in fiction in general, I love Bean clashing in DBZ. Even like DBZ games that let you do it, it's like, oh, that's so good. It just it feels so good, you know. I don't know what it is. I've always been obsessed with that, because obviously I've been obsessed with DBZ since I was a little kid. So that element's always been something I love. So it just kind of reminded me of that. But I thought it was kind of a neat, interesting development. It's like, oh yeah, Esperanza's like, he didn't see you. You were invisible to him. She's like, I know, because, you know, as someone who spent so much of their life being invisible to other people, I can recognize that. And so he can only see people with superpowers. It kind of became pretty clear. It's so interesting, because I guess it kind of makes sense in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's in particular when he's in that form. It kind of actually, when he's all shadowy like that, it makes me think of either the Mind Flayer from Stranger Things, because I make Stranger Thing comparisons, but it also makes me think of the Fog Monster from Lost. So it's just elements like that. But luckily, Nicole stabbed him through the chest with a metal rod, and Dion used it to kind of surge it through him. And I even loved at one point, like, he was about to attack Dion, but luckily Mark still was there, conscious enough to kind of hold him back and kind of break free and stop the monster long enough for all that to happen. And we see all those people get set free, and I was like, oh, are they alive? But then we see Mark, and the way he is, I'm like, they're not alive, are they? And it's like, you know, getting to say goodbye to his family. And she's like, you know, he's like, it wasn't okay that I didn't prepare you for this. But he ends up bringing up the fact, because we see part of the creature go off and somewhere. I was like, this thing isn't dead. We just saw it sprout off somewhere. And then even he says, like, energy doesn't die, it gets converted, and that thing isn't dead. But even Dion's like, but that means that good energy like you isn't going either, so I'll find some way to you. So it's like, you can only hope, like, maybe that means somewhere out there, maybe Dion can bring his dad back, or maybe he can bring Charlotte back, maybe he can bring everyone back. I mean, he has a healing ability and everything, but still. So that was kind of an interesting development. And then, like, the ending very thing at the end, I was like, so where it's like, because I was wondering, I was like, is it going to take on the form of Pat anymore, or is it going to be, it's like, no, it's found a new host, which is kind of sad, because that means there's no more Pat. But it's like, it makes you wonder, like, that's what kind of makes you think it wasn't just Pat. Maybe it's like the moment Pat became that thing, it consumed whatever the good that was in him is completely gone, and now all that was left with this creature, like this, you know. And it's interesting because Pat, like, was so obsessive, like, oh, like, if things don't go his way, that's kind of when he freaks out. And it's like this thing was kind of in a similar vein of, like, it kind of consumed so much, and it was almost kind of like you can make parallels between that creature and Pat's way of handling things. It was just interesting in the grand scheme of things. But to see him possessing Brayden at the end, I'm not surprised, because we see that Brayden kind of had certain personality aspects very, very similar to Pat. There's even that moment earlier in the episode. I didn't even talk about it, but the actor who plays his dad, like, it's so interesting. I just saw him he was he played Jack in The Outsider. Netflix wise, he played wasn't his character's name Russ? He's Ruth's it might not have been Russ, but Ruth's uncle, Wyatt's dad. So that was just kind of interesting to me to see him. I was like, oh, I'm seeing you all over the place. But nevertheless, to be fair, he did this before The Outsider. Well, you would assume so, just because that came out 2020 and this came out 2019. There was a couple months difference and stuff. Whatever, I'm getting caught up in tangents and stuff like that. But, like, his dad was like, because it was like, oh, those people were on, those potheads were on his property and stuff like that. He was trying to scare them off, but his son was like, you should have shot them, or you should use your powers. But he was like, don't ever talk like that again. I just did it to scare them. So I was like, that should have been an early warning sign, but especially the way he acted towards Charlotte. Now it's like, all right, he's off possessing Brayden's body. Is he going to find another body after? Is he going to stay with Brayden, which would make the clash between him and Dion even more interesting, because it could be a thing of, like, maybe he gets close to Dion again. I mean, granted, we don't know the full, well, because there was only a handful of people at Iceland. So there's still got to be some out there. To be fair, once again, who knows how many of them potentially have children and stuff like that. But obviously, you know, for things have changed for Nicole. Like, a lot of her life has drastically changed, because now it's like someone that she relied on for so long, so that she felt so close to, like someone that she had by her side throughout all this was Pat, and now he's gone. So, but for her, it's like, you know, Dion might be as powerful as he is, but no matter what's out there in the world, it's going to have to get through her first. So she knows that thing's still out there. She has to deal with the whole I keep saying that wrong every time. Biona, I think it's a problem. Like I always get stuff screwed up in my head. Even when I hear it a million times, I still, when the time comes to actually say it, I forget how to say it. Biona situation. Like, they're going to continue watching. Because even Suzanne was like, oh, I could say we're not going to be watching, but we are. And so it's like, oh, you saved the day and everything, but we're still going to be, you know, because he's one of the few living subjects that they're aware of. So they're going to be studying him to see what else he's capable of and what that means in the grand scheme of things. Once again, now that we know that thing isn't gone, and obviously the whole thing about, you know, potentially bringing Mark, potentially bringing everyone back, I'm curious to see if that ends up being an element, you know, that ends up going down, you know. And now it's like there's, you know, more people that now know about more about Dion's secrets now. Jonathan knows, obviously Esperanza knew. I'm curious to see if they do anything with Tess, because Tess ended up kind of being like a good friend to, you know, Nicole and everything, and now Kat, and you know what like that means for their family and stuff like that, especially when it comes to like Mark's parents. Like, is that going to be an element potentially going forward? What about Nicole and Kat's parents? Like, what's that's going to turn into? Like, once again, it's just like it's all resolved, but at the same time, you're still, part of me feels bad. It's like, oh, but you kind of feel bad about the whole Pat situation. Like I said, it's just kind of like, because the way they set him up, it's like, oh, so endearing and stuff like that, especially the moments he had with Dion, and for it to end like that is kind of like, it's sad, but it's like, well, he had to be stopped, because if he wasn't stopped, he would have kept going and would have hurt so many people. So it's a, you know, crapshoot of a situation, but yeah. I'm really interested to see where things kind of going forward from here. Raising Dion was renewed for a second season, so I'm so curious to see where everything takes us. Like I said, we know the large ensuing threat is still the Crooked Man, but beyond that, like, who knows what else might rise up. I mean, Dion might find other people who might have gone down the Crooked Man route, or maybe the Crooked Man is the only one version of himself. Like, so maybe there's not any other evil people. Maybe they'll have to unite with other, like, superpowered people. Maybe potentially that depends on, like, the whole, like I said, Biona situation, like what they get out of this, what they have planned. Is going to be the big question, you know, to keep in mind. So it's going to be interesting to see what they, you know, do with the second season. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, all life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.